Sir,
I'm not.
Is that how you view
No, I'm not.
citizens
well,
of
look,
this country?
I'll tell you what, we won a lot of elections last night. We did very well last night.
But in many ways,
I think it's going
the
to
country.
I think it's going to have a very positive impact. I watched NBC this morning. They didn't report it exactly correctly, but that's, that's the fact with NBC. Nothing I can do about that. But I want this country to have protection.
The year was 2025, and America wasn't just divided, it was fractured, cracked down the middle in ways no one could ignore. Every conversation at dinner tables, every heated debate in workplaces, every headline that flashed across the screen, it all carried the same weight.
Now, in a breathtaking act of executive obstruction of congressional oversight and the unprecedented weaponization of the Department of Justice, we have an interim U.S. attorney for New Jersey who for years has argued in court that Donald Trump is above the law. She has announced criminal charges against Congresswoman McIver.
People weren't simply disagreeing anymore. They were choosing sides. The divide had become a chasm, and in the center of this storm stood one man, President Donald Trump, a figure who was no longer just a politician, but something larger than life, a symbol of unshakable power. He inspired loyalty from millions, but he also sparked outrage and resistance from just as many. Every word he spoke reverberated across the nation like thunder. For his supporters, his words were gospel. For his opponents, they were daggers meant to wound. But here's the thing about power. No matter how strong, no matter how loud, no matter how forceful, it always attracts challengers.
Well, we have a big problem with school shooting, but we also have thousands and thousands of schools that run perfectly. You know, they talk about you can do things construction-wise, and that's really, I think nobody knows more about construction than me. You can build the construction doors. You can build what they call safety doors, where they lock on the outside, the inside, and every place else. Well, but if one of these lunatics happens to get through, then the police can't get in.
And standing tall among those challengers was a name that was becoming impossible to ignore: Jasmine Crockett. Jasmine wasn't a household name at first. She didn't come from a wealthy background or a powerful family. She built her reputation through late nights, hard fights, and a refusal to let anyone silence her voice. A congresswoman, a lawyer, a fighter for justice. People called her bold, some even reckless. But one thing was certain: she was not afraid of Donald Trump. And in 2025, that made her dangerous. The stage was set, a grand hall filled with the nation's most powerful figures, politicians, business leaders, media icons, all gathered for what was supposed to be a carefully orchestrated event.
Government abuse and political treachery. Having the government act, quote, against people who were innocent and did nothing wrong. Quote, targeting people of one political persuasion. And as one of my colleagues aptly described, quote, if you speak up about the abuses you are seeing.
The kind of night where every handshake was calculated, every suit tailored just right, and every camera in the perfect position. It was the kind of evening where power was on display, not challenged. But into this room walked Jasmine Crockett, a woman whose very presence shook the air, a voice of resistance in a room full of silence. And across from her stood President Trump, larger than life, his very presence swallowing up the space around him. He had been in situations like this countless times before. He knew how to command a room. He knew how to make the cameras bend to his will. He knew how to turn every word into a weapon, making people laugh, cheer, or cower with just a sentence. Confidence oozed from him. Why wouldn't it? For years,
I never had a defendant that had 34 convictions for felonies and did not spend one day in jail. Never in my life. And the last time I checked, the party of law and order is the only one that decided that they would be out of order and decided to nominate someone who was not only indicted, but was actually convicted of multiple felonies.
Insults and attacks had been his weapons of choice, and most of the time, they worked. Opponents crumbled. The audience laughed. Trump smiled and walked away stronger. But that night would be different. This time, Jasmine Crockett wasn't the kind of person who would crumble under pressure. She wasn't the kind to shrink when the spotlight turned her way. In fact, she thrived in it. And as the event began, you could feel the electricity in the air. Every eye shifted between Trump and Crockett, the room holding its breath. People speculated, would Trump call her out? Would Crockett stand her ground, or would this night pass without a clash?
No money for so many things, but if the Democrats, and it'd be interesting to see if we get any Democrat votes. We should. If I were a Democrat, I would absolutely, maybe Fetterman, because he seems to be the most sensible one lately. If I were a Democrat, I would vote for this bill all day long because it's tax cuts and so many other things.
Or would this become the moment everyone would talk about for years to come? Trump took the stage. His voice rolled across the room, steady, familiar, commanding. He spoke about his vision, his victories, his critics. The crowd nodded along, some clapped, some leaned in. It was classic Trump owning the room, bending the atmosphere to his will. But then his eyes shifted. They locked on Jasmine Crockett. In that moment, you could feel the shift in the room, the calm before the storm, and then it came, the insult. "You're just a loudmouth who thrives on drama," Trump spat, his words cold and deliberate. "Maybe you should worry less about politics and more about fixing your own mess." The room went dead silent. The insult wasn't just harsh, it was calculated, designed to humiliate her in front of the most powerful people in the country, to strip her of any credibility in one fell swoop. Trump wasn't just throwing shade, he was staking his claim. "This is my room, my stage, and you don't belong here." The effect was immediate. The crowd shifted. Some smirked, waiting for Crockett to crumble. Others looked uncomfortable, sensing the line had been crossed. The tension thickened, and the weight of the insult hung heavy in the air. People waited. Would Crockett fire back? Would she freeze? Would she laugh it off and let it pass? Trump had done this before. He used insults as weapons, not just to sting, but to destabilize his opponents. He thrived on making them lose their composure. Once they were rattled, he had already won. And this insult wasn't random. It was aimed with precision. Calling her a loudmouth reduced her to noise. Telling her to fix her own mess painted her as incompetent. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't like the others. She didn't flinch. She didn't shrink. She let the insult sit there. Let it sink in. Let everyone feel just how heavy it was. And then when she spoke, her words shattered the silence. "Personal attacks," she said softly, her voice steady, "are the tools of fear. They're meant to divide us, silence us, control us. But truth and courage, those break the chains." The room went quiet, but this time it wasn't in shock. It was in rapt attention. Everyone leaned forward, hanging on her every word. Crockett wasn't just answering an insult. She was rewriting the rules of the night. Trump watched, his face hardening. He expected anger, maybe a stumble, maybe a defensive response. But what he got was something different. Composure, strength, a voice that rose above the insult without stooping to its level. And then came the moment that would change everything. "Tell me, Ivanka," Crockett said, her eyes locking onto Trump's. "Is she your daughter or your wife?" Gasps rippled through the room. The silence that followed was suffocating. It wasn't just the question. It was the audacity, the precision, the perfect strike at the heart of the whispers Trump had tried to bury for years. The room froze. Trump, the man who had always had a comeback, the man who prided himself on quick jabs, was silent. His grin faltered. His eyes darted, searching for something, anything, to say. But the words didn't come. The crowd watched, a collective intake of breath, as Trump, for the first time, found himself on the defensive. Jasmine Crockett had turned his own weapon against him, and she wasn't done. "You came here to tear me down," she continued, her voice firm and unshaken. "But what you've really done is reveal yourself. Insults don't build policies. They don't fix broken systems. They don't feed families. They don't create hope. All they do is show the fear of the man throwing them." The words landed like thunder. The room vibrated with energy as the audience leaned in. This was no longer about Trump's insult. It was about leadership itself, about what kind of person should stand at the head of a divided nation. And in that moment, it was clear. Jasmine Crockett wasn't just defending herself. She was seizing the stage. Trump shifted uncomfortably. He tried to laugh. He tried to wave it off. But the power in the room was no longer his. The spotlight had shifted, and no amount of bravado could bring it back. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every flicker of frustration, every false smile, every shift of his posture. He tried to cut back in with accusations, calling Crockett reckless, dangerous, unfit, but it was too late. His words faltered, tripping over themselves. The crowd was no longer with him. They were with her. At one point, Jasmine said, "You can try to scare me. You can try to silence me. But what scares you most is that I won't stop telling the truth." The applause erupted, loud and uncontrollable. The energy shifted. Trump could feel it slipping away. His face flushed. His hands waved wildly, trying to regain control. But it only made him look smaller, more desperate. And then, with one last attempt to salvage his dignity, Trump snapped. He stopped mid-sentence, his jaw tight, eyes locked on Crockett. And then, without a word, he stormed off the stage. Gasps filled the room. The man who had dominated every room for years had just walked out, defeated, humiliated. The cameras followed him, but the real focus remained on Jasmine Crockett. She had done what no one thought possible. She had flipped the entire room in a single breathtaking exchange. The crowd erupted into applause, a standing ovation that shook the walls. People weren't just clapping. They were shouting, cheering, stamping their feet. Jasmine Crockett stood steady at the center of it all, calm, unshaken, as though she knew this was just the beginning of something far larger. And when the applause finally quieted, she spoke. "This is not about me," she said. "This is about every person in this country who has been told to stay quiet, who has been insulted, dismissed, or silenced. Tonight you saw that intimidation fails when we refuse to bow to it." The crowd erupted again, but Jasmine lifted her hand, signaling for them to listen. "Understand this," she continued. "Power built on fear is fragile. It may look strong, it may sound loud, but the moment truth stands tall against it, it crumbles." The hall went silent. Every word landed, sinking deep into the hearts of the people watching. This wasn't just a victory for Crockett. It was a reminder for everyone there of what true courage looks like. Because while Trump stormed off, his image cracked and his control slipping, Jasmine Crockett stayed. She stayed not as a politician seeking attention, but as a leader, showing the world what courage looked like in real time. She didn't bask in the applause. She stood steady, eyes forward, knowing that this fight wasn't over. This moment was only the beginning. And as the cameras zoomed in on her calm, unwavering presence, one thing was clear. This was no longer just about one woman versus one man. This was a message that could not be ignored.